I do see Newcastle challenging next season.
Thomas Tuchel, as a German, wants to win this World Cup just as much as every English fan. Can you imagine the credit that he will have as a German if he can say, I won you your second World Cup?
If someone said to me now, there's going to be peace in Ukraine, but you've got to give him a Nobel Peace Prize, I'll be like, fine, whatever, give it to him. It's not that big a deal to me. Hello and welcome back to Whisper It Loudly. I am Hugh Woozencroft. Alongside me, Darren Lewis, assistant editor at the Mirror newspaper, and reporter, journalist, producer extraordinaire with a new podcast, by the way, Jordan Jarrett-Bryan. Yeah. Just quickly tell us about it, Jordan. Hello, everyone, by the way, but what a good place to start.
Good morning, gents. Quick plug. Yes, I've launched a new podcast. Jordan Jarrett-Bryan's The Coolest Disabled in the World. And that's the wrong name. Jordan Jarrett-Bryan's The World's Coolest Disabled. Get it right. A disability positive podcast. I get guests on. We chat about their achievements and if their disability has played a role in their achievements. Sometimes it has, sometimes it hasn't. Check it out across all your podcast platforms, across all your socials. If you're lost, come to my social. It's all there. Enjoy.
What's it called, Jordan?
One question I do want to ask you on it, because I knew this, and those that know you well know this already, but you kind of revealed to everyone, if you like, you said,
Yes.
I'm coming out, and revealed your own disability. For those people that listen to this podcast, but maybe don't follow Jordan's work elsewhere, I want to ask you about that feeling of, I don't know, revealing this news, and whether it was a big deal for you or not, I don't know.
You know what, Hugh? A lot of people have kind of come to me this last week and said, "Oh, I had no idea, I didn't know." And then my response often, as it has been over the years, is, "Why didn't you know?" But I have to constantly check myself because, well, why would they know? Why would people know? Unless you've seen my work or you know me personally or you see me in shorts or broads, why would you know that I've got a prosthetic leg and I've got one leg? There's no reason why you would know that. So I've got to stop doing that. So it's felt really, really good. I've never been shy about my disability, but I don't shout about it either. So I thought this was a good opportunity just to publicly tell everyone I've got disability and I must use that currency as leverage for the podcast launch. So feels really good. I've had a really good response. First episode is out. Go check it out. It's really, really good. We've got 15 recorded already, so we've got lots coming out. But response has been great. I feel great. The podcast is going to be great.
Jordan, just a quick question on that. Quick question on that. Do you feel it is, and it might be a broader thing, but do you feel the onus is on you to tell people, or do you feel that people should know because of the things you advocate?
Neither, really. Neither. It's not on me to kind of walk up my front door and, oh, by the way, lady at the bus stop, just so you know, I've got a prosthetic leg. Just so you know, that's not on me. But equally, there's no reason for other people to do the maths and work out I did a disability piece, so therefore I might be disabled. It's not that deep for me. It's just a case of I've got a disability. It's a minor, really. If you're interested and want to have questions, you can ask me. If not, then it's fine. I don't think there's any onus on anybody, really, in that sense. And I will just say, next week, I would love to do a section on, maybe we should have done it today, but we ain't got time, a section on the current welfare situation. There's a lot of disabled people in the UK that are going to be massively impacted by some of these cuts, and there's a discussion to be had there about where the cuts should be made. We ain't got time today. We've not planned for it today, but I think by next week we'll have some answers as well. So just broader in terms of people with disabilities in this country, there's some interesting and quite sad things happening that are going to affect many, many people. But I'm okay, but I want to be a voice for those that aren't.
Forward promotion, guys. It's like we planned this stuff. So next week we will talk about that. But it's good. It gives us a week to do our homework properly and follow the story accurately, so we can give you some of our thoughts and opinions on it next week. Remind us, I'm being serious now because I didn't even catch it the first time around. What's the name of the podcast?
Podcast is called Jordan Jarrett-Bryan's The World's Coolest Disabled. All your socials, across all your podcast feeds and YouTube as well.
Fantastic. He knows how to plug. There you go, guys. So let's get to our conversation. We'll start with the weekend sport. We start with sport. In fact, there's a big sport flavour to today's episode because we'll talk about the Carabao Cup final, what it means for Newcastle, a little bit on Liverpool too. We'll look forward to Thomas Tuchel's first games in charge of England. We'll talk about Russia and the possibility of a ceasefire not being agreed, what that might mean for world and European politics. And Lewis Hamilton is back on the track, but this time in a Ferrari. We'll ask if he is the greatest black British sports person of all time. But let's start with the Carabao Cup final. I was there at Wembley. Fantastic, magnificent atmosphere. I got to see Darren Lewis at halftime. He wasn't in a good mood. I didn't see him at full time. He's lucky I didn't catch him at full time, to be perfectly honest. But Jordan Jarrett-Bryan played the WhatsApp group troll this weekend to a perfect, I've got to say, Oscar-worthy performance this weekend. Incredible, Jordan. Just what you need when someone loses a big final. But before we get to the losers, Darren, let's talk about the winners. Newcastle United, first domestic major trophy for 70 years. The long wait is over. We saw how emotional those Magpies fans were just on the day, but also across the weekend. Brilliant performance on the day from the team. Eddie Howe, an English manager, first time since 2008, an English manager has won an English major domestic trophy as well. So there's significance in that. But it was a day when I think no one would begrudge the fans the joy, happiness and relief of winning that trophy. But people were asking the question, how much of it is down to Eddie Howe and the individual players' performances, or the bigger picture? And the bigger picture is that Eddie Howe took over a team that was 19th in the Premier League, struggling and looked like it was on its way to relegation. The club was taken over by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. They spent money, like many clubs in the Premier League spent money. But since that point, the change has been remarkable. He's taken them to the Champions League. He's now taken them to an unlikely trophy. And I guess I think the truth is probably somewhere in between in terms of what is most significantly responsible. So, Darren Lewis, I'll come to you first. How do you judge the brilliance, the significance of this trophy win for Newcastle United?
Well, I think it's seismic. I think for Newcastle, it could be the start of a new era. They've done a fantastic job in terms of building a team and building a real commitment to the team. They've got terrific players in there. And I love the captain, Bruno Guimaraes. He joined from Lyon a couple of years ago, I think 2022. Even though there were higher profile clubs at the time in for him, he basically said, no, I want to help this club. They're the biggest, in his opinion, in the world. And he's been sensational for them. Tonali in midfield, Joe Linton, that midfield three were so impressive and out-muscled Liverpool, which I never thought I would say. And then up front, they've got a super striker in Isak, who I don't think will be leaving in the summer. I think as far as Newcastle are concerned, they've won something. They're in a good position to get into the Champions League. He's probably going to get a new contract, which is going to basically fulfill his financial needs. And they're a terrific side. I must just mention Dan Burn as well, because he's a really good success story, making his way up the leagues. Everyone now knows the story of Blythe Spartans and Wigan and all, and the love letter from his dad in terms of the commitment to the club. It's a terrific story all round. And Eddie Howe, everybody knows that. A lot of people, a lot of agents were touting more accomplished foreign coaches to take that job at Newcastle. And when Eddie got the job, at the time it was seen as underwhelming in a lot of people's eyes. But he's really built a team methodically, impressively, and they wanted it more on Sunday. I can't lie. I'm happy for them. They wanted it more at Wembley. They knew what the moment meant to them. Liverpool were too emotionally hurt by the PSG defeat and couldn't really raise a leg, whereas Newcastle were hungry for it, they're at it, and they got what they deserved.
Listen, it's a good assessment of the match, and Jordan, feel free to give your opinion on that if you'd like to. But what about the question as to what is most responsible for the success at Newcastle United? Eddie Howe and his tactics, his approach, his players, or the fact that ultimately they have, even though they haven't spent as much money as they possibly could have, and that's another way of gauging it, of course. They've spent money, but not more money than everyone else in the Premier League or anything like that. So, the turnaround is probably thanks in part to the Saudi ownership, the PIF. But but not completely. I think huge credit does have to go to the players and the manager.
I think it does, Hugh. I think sometimes you get managers at certain clubs that are quite clearly the single biggest component in a club's success. I think if you look at what's happening at Aston Villa with Unai Emery, they've spent money, yes, but I think you can see that there's a man that has made some good intelligent signings and he's coaching players. I think if you look at players that, I'm looking at Iraola at Bournemouth, they've spent money too, but you can see that he's making some of their non-expensive players better. There's coaching happening there. There's a guy that's grabbed the club and dragged it, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 places up the table. Even Klopp, maybe to a lesser degree, but an example of a figure that has, albeit with talented players at Liverpool, but he, for me, was the single most important element in Liverpool's rise. And I think Eddie Howe deserves so much credit. And it's been flagged before. I'm not saying anything original here, but I think the single most, the biggest shining light of Eddie Howe's work at Newcastle is Joe Linton. I think back to about 3 or 4 years ago, I used to have so many arguments with friends of mine about how bad Joe Linton and Almiron were. I thought they were championship players at best. I thought Almiron was horrible, really bad player. I never got the hype around Almiron and Joe Linton. But when you see what he's done to Joe Linton now, like he's not a worldie, but he's an accomplished Premier League player now who has won a trophy, and he's been a key figure in winning that trophy. And I think when you get someone like Eddie Howe, it's easy to see now why England apparently were looking at him. If you remember 2 or 3 years back, my club were linked to him. I think after Wenger, I think when Wenger was leaving, Eddie Howe was strongly linked to my club as well as Spurs. You can see now why these clubs wanted him. I've seen him interviewed over the last couple of years. He speaks really well about his method and his process. I'm not really, the thing that irks me about Newcastle is the rhetoric around them that they're a big club. Really annoys me. Newcastle United are not a big club, right? So that's always made me kind of, they're not a big club. Of
course they are. Why are they not a big club?
Darren, because on no metric apart from their stadium do they fulfill big club status. They're not a global club. They don't win stuff. They don't compete for stuff. They don't keep their best players. They don't sign the best players.
They've signed Isak. They've signed Tonali, won the Scudetto with AC Milan.
Hang on.
Isak and Guimaraes,
who is hang on. Isak and Guimaraes were not world stars when they signed them. They don't sign the best players in the world. They've made them great players now. But I'm just making a side point that.
All right, let me ask you this very quickly before you move on. Who in the Arsenal team is one of the best players in the world?
No, but Arsenal have got a history of signing the best players.
Just tell me.
Who in the Arsenal team right now is one of the best players in the world? Bukayo Saka, William Saliba.
Is Bukayo Saka one of the best players in the world?
In his position, I would say
he's one of the best players in the world.
Sorry?
I'll ask you to adjudicate. Bukayo Saka, we all know he's a magnificent footballer.
And I'm not saying he's world class, but if you're saying for us to name the top 10 right wingers in world football, I think Saka's in that.
Okay. By that metric, I agree with you. But world class, there's only one for me in the Arsenal team who gets in that conversation. That's
a different question to me. But the point you're making, Darren, but the point I'm making, sorry, is that Newcastle have not got a history of attracting the best players in the world. But that aside, I was very happy for them because on the day, they were the better team from start to finish. And there's too many finals that I see that the rightful team doesn't win. This was an example of the team that deserved to win the game won the game. And just final point, I loved Eddie Howe's talking before the match where he was saying, the difference between the last final against United 2 years ago and this final was in that final, the lead up, there was an excitement, almost hysteria about going to Wembley and going to that final. Whereas this time they learned from that and they were like, you know what? Let's just go there. Let's be calm. Let's not treat this as the best day or the biggest day of the history of the world. Let's go there, calm, stick to our plan, fight for every ball, and do our best. And I think that slightly change in approach, I think, was what was contributed to them winning the final on the weekend. So whilst I'm happy for them, I've always had this little bit of an irking about the rhetoric around Newcastle being this super club. Because outside of Newcastle, They're not.
I think you're as wrong as the day is long. Newcastle are a huge club. Massive.
Yeah, but Darren. We're talking about them winning their first domestic trophy in 70 years, pretty much. So
they're a massive club that has underachieved, but they're a massive club.
Under what metric?
They are. But they are. They're a big
club. No, they're not. They're a well-supported football club. That's different from being a big club. They're a well-supported club. I'll give them that. But under no other metric do they tick big club status.
They went to Champions League 2 years ago.
Oh, come on.
I'm just asking. I'm just putting a point in there, defending them. Yeah, okay. All right. So we were trying to give Newcastle their flowers and Jordan decided to spoil the party. Newcastle fans, congratulations once again for your fantastic trophy. Congratulations from everyone on the Whisper It Loudly podcast. Congratulations. Including Jordan Jarrett-Bryan. Listen, my view on it is, I'm one of those, I don't think state-sponsored ownership is a good thing for football. In fact, generally in British society, I think we are too encouraging of foreign investment, particularly from foreign states, in a way that that they would never allow British investment. They would never allow the British state to own organizations and institutions of significant cultural value there. For some reason, we love money so much in this country that we'll give away big football clubs like Newcastle United.
Hugh, you make a really good point. You make a really good point.
Sponsorship.
There is a little bit of hypocrisy around this because when the conversation moves towards,
I haven't finished my point.
Tearing down Saudi and Saudi's bad for this and Saudi's bad for that, suddenly everybody's going to change their mind and they'll forget all of this fairy story triumphalism around Newcastle at the moment. The individuals, how Byrne, Gomeresh, Isak, great job by the individuals and the team. The ownership issue seems to have been completely forgotten, which you're right to raise.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think we've hit the point, though, with it where I think these ownership models are going to be forgotten. I think the watershed, that moment has come and almost gone. The need for, and I was one of those people who was very disappointed about that ownership being allowed, because obviously, and if people don't remember, the Premier League took guarantees that the Public Investment Fund, Mohammed bin Salman, of course, the supreme leader, wasn't going to be involved in the day-to-day running of the club. And if you know about Live Golf and their court case over in the States, where their accounts were demanded by authorities in the US, and they put in their defense in court that, well, you can't have our accounts because Live Golf is owned by the PIF, the Public Investment Fund, which is part of the Saudi state. And so we don't give our accounts over to another sovereign state, if you like. So it is very much entrenched with the Saudi government. And I think that's become very, very apparent. The Premier League, having been given those guarantees and those guarantees having failed, obviously did nothing about it, which sent a big message about truly what the situation was. And so it's one of those, and I hate to say it because, sometimes you feel in life like a small person who can't do anything about a situation. And I think this is one of those situations. We're not going to be able to do anything about it. We are powerless to do anything about it. The Newcastle fans obviously love it, and they're the only people who probably could do anything about it. So that's it. We just kind of move on, and there will probably be more of it in the future. Again, I want people listening to this to understand we're not trying to take away from the success of Newcastle, because I think Eddie Howe's done a fantastic job. He is an excellent coach. I wanted him to become the England coach. Maybe this wouldn't have happened had England gone in hard for Eddie Howe. But, life is a funny story, and this is where Newcastle fans are.
But Hugh, it's interesting that maybe this is the reason why he turned it down. Maybe he really thought that he was close to achieving something special. And I just wonder if he feels it was an easier achievement to win something with Newcastle than it would be with England. And also, England's not going anywhere. He can still get the England job after Thomas Tuchel, for example. In fact, if anything, this enhances his chances of getting the England job post Tuchel. But also, I just it's really interesting that he decided to stay with Newcastle. And for me, it's now about, well, what now? I put in our WhatsApp group, I think Newcastle and maybe just a handful of players this summer from title challenging. And you, I think everybody else disagreed, and maybe you're correct. But I just wonder what this means from here on in. If they can put 4 or 5 quality players and keep their current squad, if look, Liverpool will do another time. But if Liverpool was to lose 2 or 3 of their stars who are on their last year of their contracts, they're going to be in a real rebuild next year. Arsenal are Arsenal. I'm not convinced City are going to just automatically ascend back to the top of the league next year, as everybody else keeps telling me. So next year could be up for grabs in terms of contending for the title. I'm not talking about winning it, but contending. So from here on in for Newcastle, they've got to make sure that now there's a standard been set. Getting to semis and finals needs to be the norm for them. Getting to Champions League places needs to be the norm for them. I think it does. I think it does.
No, they've hit on some very, and you've already mentioned one of those. Sometimes you need luck when you're building a good team. And actually, when you think about some of the teams that have challenged for the league recently, maybe luck was involved. You know, did Liverpool think they were getting a 40-goal-a-year player when they signed Mo Salah? No, I think they thought they were getting a very good player who would contribute. But one of the world's best, someone who was in a conversation for a Ballon d'Or for £30 million, I don't think anyone saw this coming. Sometimes you just hit on a superstar with one of your signings. And maybe Newcastle could do that, but they would need truly top players to be in that conversation. With respect to the team that they have now, there's some very good players there. And like you said, they hit on some. You know, Bruno, fantastic. Bruno Guimaraes, and he's improving every time you see him. You know, the likes of Joe Linton, I don't think anyone saw him being a great midfielder coming when they signed him as a terrible centre forward. You know, that was a poor signing in terms of the position they wanted him to play. He turns out to be a brilliant signing in another position. You know, the likes of Anthony Gordon, obviously Alexander Isak may well, again, you know, fire you into that conversation if he stays at the club. But I think when you look at the recruitment of other teams, they are likely to be signing better players than Newcastle at this stage. Unless, and this is a big caveat, the court case involving third-party transactions that Manchester City won against the Premier League, which means that you can kind of increase the spending that comes from companies and organizations associated with your ownership group, i.e. could a raft of Saudi-based companies begin to sponsor Newcastle and have a huge influx of money there? You know, if they then go and spend big and get really top draw players, of course, they could be in that conversation. You know, they're a very good team. But I think if you're looking currently at their style, how they play football, I don't think it's currently conducive to really being in the conversation to win the league.
I disagree. I disagree. I think if you look at Liverpool's team, Andy Robertson was signed from Hull. He wasn't a top player. He developed.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well,
you need to be very lucky. No, you need to be very lucky.
Well, I'll just continue my point, and then
hold on. You cut me off a minute ago, so you set the standard.
No, ladies. I'm
about to go through this.
Darren, you go first, and then Hugh, you come back in.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you very much. Trent came from the academy. Harvey Barnes isn't a top player, but he's made an effective contribution to the Newcastle team. I'm looking. I'll just focus first on Liverpool. Trent came from the academy. Andy Robertson came from Hull. If I look at further up in the team, Sadio Mane, who helped them to win silverware, he came from Southampton. It was a good. Liverpool's triumphs are the result of good scouting, intelligent scouting, bringing players in at the right time. Everybody needs luck. I get that. But I think if you were to look at, in fact, I was with somebody very esteemed on Sunday who said to me, who looked at the team sheet and said, that team, i.e. Liverpool, beats that team, i.e. Newcastle. And on paper, that is the case. But if you've got a really good teamwork ethic, you've got the hunger, the sum of the parts works effectively, it doesn't have to be top players. That's one of those assumptions people always make. And sometimes the teams with the most money, we've seen so many times in football history, don't necessarily go on to win. It's the team with the best work ethic, the teams with the most hunger, the teams with a good culture, a good tactician, in terms of the manager, a good leader. There are so many other things rather than money that make a good team. And for that reason, I do see Newcastle challenging next season. It won't be easy because I do see City having bedded in Kusanov, bedded in Gonzalez, bedded in Marmoush, and bringing in new players in the summer. They will be strong again. It will take a good midfield to get past Rodri and Gonzalez, who are going to protect that back four. But I think Newcastle will be there. One last thing with Newcastle, and this is what I mean about good scouting. Last summer, Newcastle really looked at Serdar Guirassy, the Dortmund striker, who's ripping it up for them in the Champions League and domestically as well this season. But they decided, no, we're going to wait. And he went, obviously, to Dortmund instead. But that tells you the caliber of player that they're looking at. And if they were to get another, somebody like him, maybe even him, you never know, and one other striker, that's him, Callum Wilson, Isak, and another. That's a good stable of front men there, capable of helping them in what will be a tough season with a tough workload. So I'm not writing Newcastle off at all.
Mm-hmm. Wilson will be gone, I think, but I'm not writing them off because anything can happen in football. But there's a way to go, I think, and maybe 4 or 5 signings is the number, but they have to be good ones, I think, to turn them into challengers next season. But I also think the reality is the style of football that needs to be played to be at the top of the Premier League right now. We're talking about 38 games. I get what you're saying, and Newcastle can beat anyone on their day, as they showed at the weekend, because they're a very good football team. But to become that consistent 38-game team over the course of the campaign takes a lot at the moment. And to be honest, it probably includes a real top draw manager. And Eddie has a fantastic manager. I'm not, you guys can start the debate if you want to, as to where he might sit in terms of his quality as a coach next to Pep Guardiola, Mikel Arteta, and some of the managers at the top of the league. Yeah, Unai Emery, some of these guys. So.
Can I give you a stat? Going into the game, Liverpool had won 11 of their previous 17 games in all competitions. Going into the game, Newcastle had won 14 out of 19. So actually, Newcastle were more consistent over this preceding couple of months than Liverpool were. So when you talk about
Liverpool are playing Champions League football.
Yeah, and Newcastle have been playing FA Cup and Carabao Cup football.
Yeah, but PSG
exactly.
are different to Newcastle.
PSG are one team. PSG are one team, right? Even let's assume Liverpool won both those matches, they'd still have won fewer games.
Yeah, but you're including games like the PSV game at the end of the Champions League when they played a second-string team. They'd already won the group. I get your point, but I don't think anyone thinks Newcastle are currently a better team than Liverpool.
That's not what I said. That's not what I said. You're talking about consistency.
You said they're more consistent. Yeah, you're saying they're more consistent.
Yeah,
so a better
more
team.
Consistent doesn't mean better. More consistent just means more consistent.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, we'll end on that note. Yeah, let us know what you think in the comments. Can Newcastle challenge for a Premier League title next season? Someone clip that up. By the way, Darren Lewis. Yeah. Anyway, let's talk England.
I said they could challenge for the title.
No. Just the being more consistent doesn't make you better. I love it.
No, there's always a soundbite. It doesn't make you better. It doesn't mean you are better. It just means you have been more consistent. An inferior side could be more consistent than an expensively assembled side with better players, but that team could underachieve, and the so-called inferior players could be more consistent.
Right. Darren, don't text me after the show asking me to clip this bit out.
It's gold. It's gold. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk. Okay, let's move on, guys. Let's move on. Let's talk England next. And what we need to see from Thomas. What's wrong? He's texting him now. Let's talk Thomas Tuchel, guys. Come on, let's talk Thomas Tuchel. And what do we need to see from his first England camp? Let me remind you of kind of the headlines from his first England squad. Marcus Rashford recalled. Aston Villa's Marcus Rashford in the squad. Last played against Brazil in a friendly in March of 2024. He, of course,
sorry,
on loan
Hugh.
from
Sorry, Hugh.
Manchester.
You mean Darren Lewis's Marcus Rashford? Isn't that?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I don't know how much he's paying him, but there you go. Dan Burn from Newcastle. We should mention him again. He's in the squad for the first time, as is Arsenal's Miles Lewis-Skelly. England start their World Cup qualifying campaign with a double-header at Wembley against Albania Friday night. That's the 21st, and then Monday the 24th. Jordan Henderson has been recalled as well. He's a key figure for Ajax at the moment. Morgan Gibbs-White was initially left out, but he does earn a late call-up. And the other headline news, that's a player that's not in the squad, but we maybe can talk about it a little bit. He did indicate very strongly that Arsenal's Ben White would now be included in terms of his selection plans moving forward. White, though, just not fit enough after returning from injury to make this squad. But the question is, what we need to see from Thomas Tuchel in his first England camp over these first two games, Albania and Latvia. Jordan, I'm going to start with you. What do we need to see?
I think we need to see the fledglings of an identity of what Thomas Tuchel plans to do going forward. We're not going to see it, obviously, in his first two games, but I think what I'm looking to see is, and the personnel will change, so it's a little bit unfair to judge him on these two fixtures. But I think what we can judge him on is a very clear identity of his clear identity on this team. So is he going to be a high pressing England team? Is it going to be a low block? Is it going to be a possession? I'm looking to have a really early understanding of, okay, whether I agree or disagree with the tactic is one thing, but at least I can see it. I can see that this is what Thomas Tuchel wants to do with these particular with this particular England side. He's on a mission to win the World Cup. He's not on a long thing. He's not here to blood youth. He's not here to, strengthen the next 10 years of English football at the top level. He's here to win a World Cup. So he's here to win. He needs to instill in these games between now and America a winning mentality. I don't know if style is that important, but I think identity, for me as an observer, as a journalist watching these games, I just want to see, okay, that's what he's looking to do. But I think the most important thing is that he needs to instill winning. I think results matter in a way that with Southgate leading up to tournaments, it didn't matter so much. I think because the ultimate goal is you've got this tournament to win, I think he's got to instill that winning mentality. That links to, just my final point, the whole hullabaloo around the inclusion of Jordan Henderson. I saw the furore around it and, he's picked this player, that player. He clearly wants standard setters. To him, someone in the squad that can set a standard, that's an experienced winner, is more important than another player that's, say, maybe more talented. So you know me, I'm a massive Jacob Ramsey fan. I love Jacob Ramsey. I think he's a talented player. But Thomas Tuchel clearly believes that it's more important for him to sacrifice a talented player to have somebody that might not play much, but can instill a winning culture. And all the kind of noise that comes when people select their England squads, I just find really, really embarrassing, because I'm in the Darren Lewis camp of, I don't think foreigners should manage national teams. But if you've brought him in, that horse has bolted, you have to trust him. Trust that this guy, and I'm also not as big a fan of Thomas Tuchel as other people are as well, but his records does speak for itself. The guy's won stuff. He's a successful manager, so trust him. So if he's picking Marcus Rashford, it's for him, it's for a reason. If he's bringing in Jordan Henderson, it's for a reason. I genuinely believe, you, that Thomas Tuchel, as a German, wants to win this World Cup just as much as every English fan. Can you imagine the credit that he will have as a German if he can say, I won you your second World Cup? So everything he does is through the prism of wanting to win the World Cup. So trust the guy. We're not going to like his selections at times, but for me, the selection that he's made, we have to. I don't agree with all of it, but I just think trust the guy. This guy is a guy that comes from a country that knows how to win World Cups. So if you're bringing him in, I don't think it makes sense to kind of lambast his decision. So I'll defer. But for me, I want to see an identity. And for me, it's about winning. Games have to be won. Between now and America, it's got to be win, win, win. So when they get to the States, that mentality of we're here just to win is at the forefront of their minds.
I do like the idea, the notion there that winning the World Cup is somehow related to your nationality and just your DNA, in which case we've got no chance anyway. So,
well, no, but the point I'm making is that he's from Germany, so I think it wouldn't be crazy to think that he has an understanding and from a culture that is used to winning major tournaments, and if he can bring a semblance of that to England, despite there being a loser culture here, I don't think that's a bad thing. Yeah. So trust him. What I'm saying.
£10 million for 18 months in charge. His job is clearly to win the next World Cup. So for me, he's got a short period of time to do that. He alluded to that in his first press conference. You know, it's about forging a relationship on the pitch. It's about getting a dynamic within the group that works positively. And for me, all I want to see in these two games, and I don't think he has a long time to do it, is what are my first choice tactics? Can I get as many of my perceived first team in that 11 for both games? And the other changes that I make in terms of my starting lineup should only really be down to injury. So I basically, I think he does have a lot of injuries at the moment, but we should see kind of 6, maybe 7 of what England's perceived best team is out for both of these games. And that's simply because they need to get used to his methods. They need to get used to his coaching, particularly in-game coaching and changes. You know, there is no time for, I want to see what this player is like. I want to see what that player is like. And I agree with you. That's probably why the likes of Rashford and Henderson have been recalled, because you kind of know what you're going to get despite Rashford's recent struggles. I'm still one of those that thinks we don't need someone like Thomas Tuchel to win the World Cup. I just don't think we do. It's not to say he's not a great coach, but if you look at the coaches winning international tournaments, Didier Deschamps wasn't a great club coach before he went to France. He's got to 2 World Cup finals and won one of them. You know, Lionel Scaloni just won the World Cup with Argentina, won the Copa America too. You know, not a big name in terms of coaching. Spain, Luis de la Fuente, the same. You know, he's gone and won the Euros with a fantastic team. You know, people in Spain didn't want him to be the coach of Spain because he didn't have the credentials at the time. He came from in-house, so did Scaloni, came from within house. We took a look at Lee Carsley. I think he had a bit of an audition to become the England boss, to be perfectly frank, and it didn't work out for him in the end. Thomas Tuchel has been given the job. But for me, there's just no time to waste. And it's not just this England camp, it's every England game going forward. You know, there needs to be a level of consistency in team selection. There needs to be a level of consistency in tactics, because any team that goes to win a major tournament has an excellent 2 or 3 years before the tournament. Most of the players know their job and they forged a decent relationship on the pitch. And England don't really have too much time to do that, if at all. So that's it. There's no, you can't be complicated about it. You can't be special about it. You can't be saying, oh, this guy's having a good 5 or 6 games. Let me call him into the next England squad. It just is what it is. Thomas Tuchel's got to give it his best shot with what he's got, and that's it. Darren Lewis?
Well, first of all, I think as it's a little bit fair. I'm going to work backwards. It's a little bit fair to say that Deschamps didn't have a great managerial career, because he won trophies with Monaco and Juventus. Monaco, Juventus, and Marseille, I should say, as a manager. And De La Fuente ripped it up as an age group coach as well. So there was a natural progression in terms of getting into the national side. So I do think you do that winning mentality you do take into management if you do have that culture already. As far as something that Jordan said, you kind of I agree, but you framed it not quite right. It's not that I don't like foreigners managing national sides. I just think international competition, the essence of it is our best against your best. And it might well be that you've got a great team, but you don't quite have the manager at that point, or you've got a superb manager, but you don't have the team. But that's the competition. And so for that reason, I think it should have been an English coach. And I think we've kind of tried to bend the rules a little bit, if you like, or the spirit of the rules, by going in paying to get the best in class. But as far as Tuchel is concerned, he's a fantastic communicator. He's somebody who can talk to football, but he can talk to society as well. And I think we'll get a clear idea of what he's trying to do all the way through. in terms of what I want to see from the game, I agree with Jordan. An identity straight away. I'm not as exercised by as some people are about the recall of Jordan Henderson. I can see why he's trying to do it. He knows what he's going to get from the A-listers in the England team squad. But these are players on the fringes. Can they come in and show that leadership? Can they come in and give him something to think about? It won't just be a first 11 that wins a European Championship or a World Cup. It will be the extended squad, the players who can step in when the first team aren't quite at it, or if they need a rest in that third game of a group stage. And then you need to know that the players that you're going to bring in either have the quality, the leadership, the temperament, the winning culture, all those things. So I'm happy with the squad. I don't have any issues with it. Certainly not as many issues as some people have with Henderson. I still think he's a terrific player. Yes, he's only started 2 of the last 10 games, I think it is, for Ajax. Again, I don't have an issue with that because you know what he gets. And he commands that respect in the dressing room as well. But for these 2 games, victory, obviously, and I think we will win Latvia and Albania. We're going to be okay. But an identity, most of all.
All hell's going to break loose if England don't win those 2 games, that's for sure. So we're maybe going to take it for granted that England are going to win those 2 games. Listen, there's some players that have been left out, and the only thing that I'd say about the England squad is that the messaging around it, like, it's easy for us to be frank and say, you know, he's got to choose his best team. You've got to trust him. You know, for the players that have been playing well that have been excluded, you know, there is a big depression over, you know, what you're doing on a weekly basis in the Premier League or for your club, because, you know, you may feel like no matter what you do, the manager isn't going to pick you, or at least this manager isn't going to pick you. And that might be a negative moving forward. So he still needs to, but that before you interrupt me again, Darren, before you interrupt me again.
Let him finish, Darren, let him finish.
All I'm saying is that message still needs to be there to all English players that if you're playing well and you're at a very high level, the England squad is there for you.
I think that he's got a really good system of communicating with the players that he doesn't pick. There are some players
mobile phone.
Before you interrupt me, there are some players who don't deserve to be picked. There are some players who are doing very well that he quite clearly is going to have in his shake-up when it comes to picking the higher caliber players. But again, I look at this squad, it's common. It's a squad of players who have an opportunity, who have a chance to push themselves into his thinking. And I think these are 2 ideal games for him to put those players in so that they can show him what they're made of. And then when he picks some of the higher caliber players, some of the A-listers, if you like, then some of those players will be in his thinking. But I think he's working backwards rather than picking the same old players that he always picks. Oh, that England managers always pick.
Okay, we're going to see. We're going to have more conversation about Thomas Tuchel's opening 2 games in charge next week. Of course, we will on Whisper It Loudly. So stay tuned for that. Okay, up next, we're going to move to the world of politics. And by the time you're watching or listening to this, there may have been some rather serious developments regarding the situation between Ukraine and Russia. But as it stands, as we record early on Tuesday morning, there is a planned phone call between the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, and the American president, Donald Trump, on Tuesday. That is today as we speak. So let's hope those conversations go better than Zelensky's visit to the White House, for all of our sakes, to be perfectly honest. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has met with his defense minister and new chief of general staff to discuss the frontline situation and engagement with partners on security guarantees for Ukraine. Zelensky has said he's told Rustem Umerov, that's his defense minister, to build a team that could discuss all the details of the security system that Ukraine needs, as well as the implementation of decisions made at the military and political level, starting from the army heads meeting in London. That comes this Thursday. Now, the UK has said that more than 30 countries should be involved in a coalition of the willing, a plan to provide military support to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. Now, here's the issue NATO soldiers, and that's generally the peacekeeping force that would be deployed, is kind of a red line for Vladimir Putin. He does not want them being based in Ukraine or anywhere near the Russian border, and would see that as a sign of European aggression. Clearly, a ceasefire wouldn't hold in that situation. And of course, the other side, the United States, and still I think the EU and Europe, and obviously Ukraine, are looking for a ceasefire that guarantees the future security of Ukraine. And how can you guarantee that? That is going to be the big question. Now, what it seems to be is this conversation, by the way, is actually about outlining a framework for negotiations moving forward and what that would look like. But during that period, they would obviously want a ceasefire. Let's down arms. Let's down any form of aggression while we have these conversations. So you might hear the headline by the time you hear this, that a ceasefire has been agreed, but that might not mean long-term peace for Russia or Ukraine, or at least in that region. So we shall see moving forward. I think Donald Trump would take huge credit from the idea that a ceasefire, even a temporary one, was made due to his involvement in this. And I guess we're going to discuss it. Darren, I'm going to start with you for this one. If Russia, and this is the big question, I think, if Russia doesn't agree to an immediate ceasefire, the UK has kind of intimated there might be further punishments, maybe more sanctions against Russians that they can possibly give, maybe more sanctions against the country itself. And maybe other European nations will be doing the same if a ceasefire isn't agreed. But what does it say about Russia's intentions if they're not happy to agree to a ceasefire in the short term?
Well, Russia's been empowered by the US, and although Trump is suggesting that they're going to hold a conversation, we record on Tuesday, so by the time a lot of people watch this, they will already have had that conversation. I don't think Russia is concerned in the slightest about this country or NATO. I think Russia and Putin and the relationship that is developing between him and Trump suggests that they are very unconcerned about the UK. And it's the reason why the European nations, the Western European nations, have come together to work out what to do. Now, I think ultimately it will be the case, as many of the Western European leaders have been saying, that they have to forge their own path, because what they've done is not necessarily listened to what Trump has done, but they've certainly listened to what he has said. And all of the noises coming from him, from the Oval Office, suggest that NATO is on its own. And we are seeing right now a very concerning period in terms of the world order, the post-war world order. It's shifting. It's fracturing. Now, some people would say that's a good thing, because it means that Western European nations have to get their house in order. They have to invest in their defense. They have to basically look after themselves and not think about, if you like, Big Brother to come along and help them. But some people believe it makes us more unstable. The one thing I'm fairly sure of is that in terms of Russia, Russia will not be concerned about this country. And it's the reason why Keir Starmer is trying to get together this coalition of the willing. I hate these pithy names they come up with. Basically, it's a desperate attempt to keep everybody together rather than going in their own direction. And I think it's a recognition of the fact that if they don't sort themselves out, they could be left very vulnerable.
Jordan, where do you sit on it?
Yeah, largely agree. I largely agree that I don't think Russia cares about anybody. I mean, Darren says this country. I don't know if Russia cares about any other nation. They don't. I think they feel they don't have to. They're going to get their way. They want their way, and they feel they've got the arms and the means and the military boots on the ground to take on anybody. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But That's what I believe they believe. Listen, if Donald Trump can get a long-standing ceasefire that suits both countries, or let's say Europe and Russia, then fair play to him. Do you know what I mean? There's talk about him wanting a Nobel Peace Prize. There's a lot of people that think, oh, he shouldn't get it. Listen, if he can get a long-standing peace deal, then I don't care. Give him what he wants. There's more important things at stake here than whether he gets a Nobel Peace Prize or not. But I don't trust him. I don't trust that he's going into this meeting with Vladimir Putin with the best interests of Europe and the UK at heart. I think he's going to do what suits his nation and suits him more so. And that's just based off of the things that I see and read about the man and his motives. I think he's a man that thinks about himself. So the fact that he's like the police keeper in this just kind of makes me a bit skeptical from the get-go, especially as we saw just a couple of weeks ago, we discussed it, how he treated the Ukrainian prime minister. So I don't have much to add in terms of, let's see what comes out of this. But if Trump can pull this off, fair play. But I have concerns about whether he will, and even if he does, what his motives are. I think what's also important is that Ukraine are kept fully involved in what happens here, because this phrase ceasefire, it doesn't mean anything if it's not long-standing. I think what Ukraine want is something that actually is long-standing, not just, we put our guns down for 6 weeks, but then there's no securities that, there's no guarantees that Russia won't step on them again. So I think what's really important is a deal that's in place that enables the Ukrainian people to have long-standing peace and a ceasefire that goes beyond the next couple of months.
The problem is, Jordan, Trump's already given away territory to Russia. Trump, as everybody is aware, is this deal that Ukraine is being forced to sign. It's been interpreted as minerals being extorted from them in return for the protection of the US. This deal is not being framed in the best interests of Ukraine, but they have to take it because they've got no other option. And all that has happened thus far is that Russia has been pandered to. So everything is being framed as though these are constructive talks where everyone sits around the table and comes to a mutually beneficial arrangement to stop the fighting. And nothing could be further from the truth. So, no, I agree with you. I don't trust Trump. I certainly don't think that we should be patting him on the back for stopping any fighting. The facts are that Ukraine are very much the country that's been stepped on. The facts are that Russia could not care less about the well-being of Ukraine or any other country that isn't in its interests. And the facts are that America, as you were saying before, are doing what suits, I say America, Trump is doing what suits him and couldn't care less about anybody else. So regardless of what happens, I won't be waving any bunting in pursuit of a Nobel Peace Prize for somebody who's, honestly, to even talk about the record of the man you're thinking about the Nobel Peace Prize should be given to. There are people who have earned it for genuine attempts at peace, for genuine life-changing achievements that have been inspirational. And we're talking about it for Trump? Okay.
No, I did just say that if he can pull off a deal that does have long-standing peace, if he can pull that off and he's a negotiator in that deal, then that for me warrants a Nobel Peace Prize. If he's the man that ensures that there is a long-standing, the war stops, basically. I mean, we think what we think about him, but that would warrant a Nobel Peace Prize, in my opinion.
Hugh?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, long-standing peace there is going to be virtually unachievable. I mean, Donald Trump will be long gone from office before it even, we hopefully will be long gone from office before we even really find out if it is a long-standing peace. But I think at this stage, it's just around going into negotiations in good faith. And at the moment, I don't necessarily know if anyone can firstly go in and talk to him as the American president in good faith, thinking that he's representing the interests of the United States when he's probably representing the interests of Russia first and foremost. And I think that will leave Ukraine getting the bum end of the deal, if you know what I mean. The bum deal, is that the phrase, rather than the bum end? Sorry about that. But I think it works. Yeah, I think it works both ways. And
where do you stand on the Nobel Peace Prize thing, Hugh?
Well, I mean, I agree with Jordan in the sense that I don't care if he wins it, if it guarantees that Ukraine goes back to living in peace and there is no fighting with Russia, but whether he can guarantee that or not, I don't know. It would be an incredible achievement if it was to be a long-standing peace. But yeah, I don't see it happening. But it's not that I think he should get it. I agree with you. He shouldn't be anywhere near a prize of that kind of recognition. But I'd rather the peace. If someone said to me now, there's going to be peace in Ukraine, but you've got to give him a Nobel Peace Prize, I'll be like, fine, whatever, give it to him. It's not that big a deal to me. So, you know how I feel about awards anyway. It goes for Nobel Peace Prizes too. Listen, very quickly, gentlemen, before we go, we've only got a few minutes left, but I did want to reflect on the start of the Formula One season. So we're kind of going back to sport to end the podcast. Lewis Hamilton has started life at Ferrari. Incredible to see the fanfare that he's been given, the respect that he's been shown. I think we got to see just how revered he is as an athlete and a driver in Formula One. And he goes to the famous red of Ferrari, which I think for many people matches up two of the greats of the sport in many ways. So hasn't been a great start for him, only one race in, but I did want to ask about him because I think the focus has been on him over the past couple of weeks as to whether you feel he fits the mold as the greatest black British athlete of all time. Maybe athlete's the wrong word, sports person of all time. Jordan?
Yeah. It's a difficult one because
you're going to say the car does the work. You're one of those guys.
I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say that I think the thing that goes against him is the argument that people say he has the car. And I think that's a little bit unfair, but I understand why people say that. He's a 7-time world champion. He's playing for the most iconic, if we kind of use, we're from football background, the most iconic team in the sport, right? So yeah, that's significant. I've only got 4 names that I thought are worthy of challenging that crown, right? I don't know if you guys would agree with these 4 names. The only 4 names I thought could challenge that would be Daley Thompson, Lennox Lewis, Mo Farah, and I've got Andy Cole. I think from football, Andy Cole was the person that I thought as a black man, as a British black football player. I couldn't think of any black football player from England or from Britain that has achieved more than Andy Cole. And if you put Lewis Hamilton in that mix, you might say 7-time world champion in a sport that isn't, a friend to the working class / black people where we're from. He smashed it. I don't know, but those are the names that I thought were worthy of contending that crown. I'll let you guys disagree or agree.
Darren?
I think they're a good selection of names. I think what I would add to that rather than take away, because I think all of those names are inspirational. What I would add maybe as a cherry on the cake, if you like, is Wrighty. Because with the other sports stars that you mentioned, they've all been exceptional. I think with Wrighty, he actually inspired a generation. And there are lots of sports stars, athletes who are benefiting from the hard yards put in by a lot of people back in the day, societally as well as from a sporting context. And I think what Wrighty did to speak truth to power inspired lots of young black men to go out and speak truth to power. What Wrighty did in puffing out his chest and expressing himself, the charisma that he had on the pitch spawned Friday Night's All Right. it spawned an expression in terms of sartorial exuberance, in terms of charisma away from the pitch. There are very few people that you know by their surname in our culture. When I say I mean English culture. And if you know anybody by their surname, you know who they're talking about. When you say Wrighty, you don't mean Mark Wright. You don't. There are so many other people that you could be referring to, but everybody knows you're talking about Wrighty. But that didn't come easy for him. And I think that when you're talking about greats, you have to quantify the achievements away from whether it's the ring, the track, the pitch, the pool, wherever. It's got to be wider than that. And that, for me, is the reason why I would go with Wrighty.
I think Lewis Hamilton's got all of that stuff away from the track, as well as the incredible success. You know, the way he stood up for social justice all over the world, the way that he tried to change Formula One, you know, a sport that may well be unchangeable, but I think he helped make great strides in it. You know, I think he's done everything he possibly can to try and change the dynamic of how his sport is seen. He's used his platform, I think, to not necessarily go deeply political, but certainly stand up for, you know, when racism became a world conversation, he made sure that he was involved in that conversation as much as he could be in social injustice as well. So I don't know if I lean towards Lewis Hamilton, but I think we're talking more. I don't want to say sports personality, but what do I want to say? You know, it's almost the largest impact.
Do you think that
rather than the greatest sports person?
Do you think Lewis? Because I agree with you, he really has risked his space and lent on his talent and his ability to be able to take the positions that he has. But do you think that he's been a beneficiary of? I mean, this society, as difficult as it may be, it's still a world away from the society we had in the 90s, when it was tough, where we didn't have a media culture that was prepared to listen. We didn't have us in the media to shout loudly about certain issues on the national platform.
Yeah, but I think that's a slippery slope. I think it's a slippery slope to say. I think it's a slippery slope to take away from one's achievements by saying, you know, well, someone else paved the way for you. Because we could say that about Wrighty and say, well, there were people in the 70s, you know, Muhammad Ali. If it wasn't for Muhammad Ali, you wouldn't have been able to say what you said. You know, I think that's kind of reductive in a sense.
That wouldn't be true. That wouldn't be true. What Muhammad Ali did was in the US. I'm not going to fight someone else's war. That had no bearing on the English culture.
No, but Ian Wright has said though, he was inspired by the actions out of the ring of Muhammad Ali, so it did have an impact.
That's two different things. It's two different
things.
No,
but sorry, I'm saying that Muhammad Ali, let me finish my point, had an impact in this country with his conversations, his many interviews that were live on the BBC that virtually the whole country, you know, tuned into, that he spoke about social injustice in the United States, but he got the conversation going in this country because so many people did look up to Muhammad Ali in this country. He was a transcendental figure. That's why I think it's reductive, because I think all of those many sports people, you know, you think about the you know, the raised fist in the air and you know, stuff like that, you know, that you know, you could say, well, the conversations around apartheid in sport and you know, just before Wrighty's time, you know, all those conversations around, you know, athletes who shouldn't be, you know, there's no point going, oh, well, Lewis Hamilton, you know, he's a beneficiary of other people breaking ground on these topics. It's like, yeah, but he still did something that he didn't necessarily have to do. So why are we trying to take it away from him? Right, he did things.
No, but again,
boundaries.
When I started, I said I would add to what has been said, not take away. And I don't think it's reductive to characterize the contribution of somebody who was inspired by something that happened on the other side of the Atlantic. But it's one thing being inspired. It's another thing to risk your space, to take your stand, to be the one who stands up and be counted. And that is what Wrighty did. That is.
So how has Lewis Hamilton not done that?
He has done that. I'm not saying he hasn't done that. What I'm saying is the media culture is very different and much more conducive to him doing it than the media culture was back in the day. You mentioned Andy Cole. Andy Cole was a legend, stood up to be counted, spoke truth to power, and people characterized him as moody, troublesome, attitude problem, because they didn't want to listen to what he had to say. They tried to do a very similar thing to Wrighty, and he wouldn't be put in that box. That's what I'm talking about. And it's because he pushed out of that, he inspired people like us to be in the media and speak and speak the way we want to speak. And since then, it's become an easier landscape. I don't think we're being truthful if we don't admit.
No, but I kind of disagree.
To be able to do that than it was then.
I kind of disagree. No, I agree with your point that it's easier now. But Lewis, you're telling me that Lewis Hamilton, it was easy for him. Look at the pushback he's had. Look at the people.
Exactly. I agree with you. It's not easy for Lewis at all. And that's what I said about risking his space. But in general terms, the landscape is nowhere near as intimidating as it was back. As bad as it is now, and it's pretty bad now, is nowhere near as intimidating as it was back then, because we had zero representation in the national media, broadcast or print, did we? Whereas for me, you're on Channel 4 News, I'm at the Daily Mirror. You know, we are on the national platform. We can breathe oxygen.
It's pretty much just us.
No, there are other people, but we're on the podcast.
No, I was joking. I was just saying that even though we are there, and that you're right, there is more representation, there isn't enough. You know, we've got several other colleagues, you know, but there isn't enough. That's all I was saying. I know that I'm not saying that you were trying to claim that it was just us, but what I would say on the final point on it is it's interesting that we've taken the conversation to a place where our black sports people, to be the greatest, have to have offered something else, have to have offered social justice and speaking about anti-racism and things like that, to be considered to be one of the greatest, you know, or the greatest black British sports people of all time. You know, I don't think we would have that conversation if it was who's the greatest British sports person of all time. I don't think anyone would be saying, what has Andy Murray done for social justice, or whoever, you know, like, is David Beckham, you know, no one would have said that. So I just find it interesting that our athletes have to have given something more. You know, by the way, I would have added to the list earlier the likes of Denise Lewis and Jessica Ennis-Hill as well, who I think have really contributed. Kelly Holmes as well, a number of people on the track who I think should get in the conversation because of how difficult it has been over the years for British athletes to perform on the track. But yeah, I agree with your list, and I might go Lennox Lewis because I stayed up late for all those fights and it was a big part of my childhood, and maybe that makes a difference to me. But I think Lewis has to be given his flowers. Doesn't matter what happens at Ferrari, which is why I wanted to have this conversation now as he starts that road, rather than when he finishes it, because I think he deserves to be seen as, by the way, someone who's won 8 world championships, because we all know why. We all know why. We don't need to. We know what happened. He should have won the 8, but we don't need to go over old ground anyway. Listen, guys, been a pleasure to be with you for the last hour or so, hour and a little bit. Jordan, Jarrett-Bryan. It looks like a frozen Darren Lewis. But, you get to see his eyes. You get to see his eyes for once. Anyway, so listen, guys, if you want to follow us on social media, make sure you do. Will Pod 1 or Whisper It Loudly Pod, depending on what you use for your social media. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notifications button. You won't miss an episode. We'll try and be out each and every Tuesday afternoon, so 1 episode per week. And make sure you comment down there if you're watching on YouTube, and we'll try and get back to you in the conversation as well. We will see you next week. Thank you very much for being with us.